1, go.
Good afternoon, grade 11th. Welcome to today's LO lesson. My name is Puleng Litika, and on the screen you can see my email address, which is litikapuleng@yahoo.com. So you can email me with regards to anything that you have questions about for our subject life orientation. That is where you can email me. I'll keep it on the slide, litikapuleng@yahoo.com. So that is where you can get me. Now today we are going to do chapter 9, unit 2, which is on climate change. Yesterday we were on chapter 9, unit 1. So we're continuing with the environment and everything about the climate. So today's lesson objectives are that you know how to define climate change, that you know the causes of climate change, that you know the impact of climate change on development, and that you know these two approaches that climate experts have come up with in order to resolve the problem of climate change. The two are mitigation and adaptation. Now on to our lesson for today. The first slide heading is climate change. So how do we define climate change? Climate change is when the usual patterns of a given region begin to change. It includes things like changes in temperature, wind patterns, and rainfall. So basically, I'm sure everyone has their own experience of climate change right now, even though I know a lot of you right now, grade 11s, were born in the 2000s, so you may not have experienced climate change the way that people who are born in the 70s and people who are born in the 80s, 60s have experienced climate change. Now, the climate that people had in the 60s and in the 70s is very different from the climate that we have now. People are complaining that in some places winters are colder and summers are hotter, and then in some places there's more wind, so there are more hurricanes and tornadoes, and then there is flooding in some areas, so the rainfall has changed. In some areas there's more rainfall than in other places. So climate change has effects in different areas. So the following bullet points are the changes that climate change has on where and how people live, plants and animals. So that is the first bullet point. Climate change affects where and how people, plants and animals live. So for instance, recently we've had floods in Pretoria and in other areas in the country. So what happens when there are floods in areas where there never used to be flooding is people can no longer live there because water comes into their houses and it ruins their furniture and it ruins their properties. So also in some areas where there was water, there's no longer water, so people can't live there anymore because there's no access to water. So, and then plants, basically plants too are affected, and this is the systems and ecology. So plants that used to survive in watery places that receive more water, they can't survive when there's less water and there's more heat. And then in areas where there never used to be water, where plants were surviving, according to where there's heat, when those places get moist and get more water, then those plants cease to survive there. And then with regards to animals, animals live where water is. where they have access to water. So what happens is that when the streams are drying up and the rivers are low, then there's not enough water for the animals that live in particular areas. So the animals either die of dehydration, they don't have any more water, or there's no longer water in the plants that live in that area. So the plants don't receive rainfall and then they don't grow. So the foods that the animals used to eat in those areas, they are gone, and then there's no food for those animals to live, and then they die. So climate change also affects food production. So the best example to use is with farmers. There are different crops and they grow seasonally. So there are crops that do better in rainy seasons, and there are crops that can resist heat and dryness. So in areas where the crops rely more on water, then if there's more sunlight in those areas and less water, then those food crops will die. So that means that there won't be enough food production in in that area. So the food production will go lower, and then there'll be less food. And then climate change also affects availability and use of water health. So when areas become dry, then obviously rivers dry up and dams have less water. And then there's less water available for people. And then obviously people use water for hygiene, for drinking. So if there's less water for drinking and hygiene, then it does cause health problems for people. So it also addresses our second last bullet point, which is health. So health overall is affected, especially if the water is affected by pollution, by companies dumping their waste and product waste into rivers and dams. So then there's not enough drinking water and there is not enough water for hygiene. Then people end up playing in the water, children play in the water, people drink up water that isn't clean, and this will affect the overall health of a population and may, in some cases, will cause death. So our future. Climate change does affect our future because if we don't take care of the earth, then this is the only earth that we live in. This is our only home. We can't exist on another planet, so we can only exist here. So if we don't take care of our vegetation, we don't take care of our animals, then we are simply not being we're not seeing how important our lives is, because if everything like climate change gets ruined, if our climate changes and everything else changes, then we won't be able to survive. We don't know what the future of our children looks like. The world might be okay for us today, but if we carry on with the habits and the activities that we're doing and we don't change them, then we don't know the kind of world that our children will survive in and our grandchildren. They might get extinct and they might not be able to live beyond uh, the millennium that we're living in. And then the next slide is on causes of climate change. So we're going to look at what causes climate change. So climate change is mostly caused by human activity. So these are the things that we do, the things that we take part in. So it is because of us. Animals are just going on with their daily lives, part of the system and the ecology. So there is no animal that is giving off noise pollution. There is no animal that is dumping waste products into rivers and seas. There is no animal that is littering. So it is about us and what we do, and how what we do affects the environment. So the climate is controlled by energy from the sun. So the universe is a masterpiece. Earth takes care of itself, everything is in its place. So everything about our weather is controlled by the sun, unless if we do something to change the way that the sun operates and the way that gases operate. So there are gases in the air that help to trap the energy from the sun that thereby warm the earth. The gases are called greenhouse gases. Without these gases, there would be no life on earth. So these are the good gases. And these are the gases that come together and make sure that we can exist. And these gases form like a layer that traps the sun from coming in, and the bad sun rays, the radiation, to come through. And they just make sure that the earth is warm enough for us to survive, and that the earth does get enough rain. Basically, it balances out our seasons and maintains our seasons as they are and as we know them. So this is how human beings have contributed to making sure that this process changes. Human beings burning oils, coal, natural gases, and clearing forests over the last 200 years has contributed to the number of gases in the atmosphere rising. So basically, we have contributed to the number of these gases filling the air, so which changes the formula in the air. This changes then the weather. The next slide explains how this means more solar radiation is trapped, which leads to the Earth's surface warming up. This is known as the greenhouse effect. So the greenhouse effect in the nutshell is these gases being trapped up in the air. So these gases, which are meant to be good, are only meant to be here in certain levels. So if they are trapped here because of human activity, then they cause the surface to warm up. And the warmer the surface is, the more our weather changes. So this is the greenhouse effect. Second bullet point, carbon dioxide is a gas mostly responsible for the increase in the greenhouse effect. So carbon dioxide is the gas, the most important gas. This is the gas that we are looking to regulate, that the sun regulates, but we are doing things that make sure that there's more carbon dioxide than is actually needed in the system. So firms giving out pollution, cars giving out emissions, and basically firms making sure that there are more waste products. Those are things that are contributing towards there being more carbon dioxide, and this causes the greenhouse effect. So carbon dioxide is the gas mostly responsible for the increase in the greenhouse effect that our world is experiencing. The more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the more solar heat is trapped. Another point that I would like to point out is that there were a lot of rainforests, and a lot of the rainforests have been removed. A lot of forests that we have, like in South America, like the Amazon and lots of other rainforests, are being cut down. Some of the trees have been taken away either for making fuel or for keeping us warm, and also for making furniture and making byproducts. So as we know, trees take in carbon dioxide and give us oxygen. So when we cut down rainforests, then we are removing our source of oxygen and one of the natural ways that Earth has of giving us oxygen. So the cutting down of trees and the depletion of trees in our systems, us making sure that our rainforests disappear, actually like it causes us to have less oxygen. So we need to take care of our environment and we need to take care of our nature. So the impact that climate change has on our development. This is the next slide. So yes, the effects of climate change are that the weather is changing. That's bullet point number one. And then bullet point number two is that there is lower food production. So these two bullet points go in hand. So we're going back to the farmers. So certain crops grow better under certain weather conditions. So there are crops that will grow better in maybe a watery season like rice that grows in swamps where there's water, and then there are crops that are more heat resistant like maize. Basically when the weather changes then everything gets switched up and some of seasonal the seasonal vegetables and fruits that we get disappear. We get a lower harvest of them. So a lower harvest of these foods means that there's lower production of food, which leads us to the third bullet point. When there is lower production of food, that means that there is lower food security. So basically, when the production of food is higher, then it means there is more food for everyone. So when there's lower production of food, it means there's less food, and people are left wanting to have more of the food of the resource of food. People are now competing for more food, and some people are left to starve. Like there are countries where there is low food production, and in these countries the food security is bad. We see that in a lot of African countries where children are starving and people are starving and going hungry because there's not enough food. So the fourth bullet point is fish resources are becoming depleted and degraded. So pollution, when we pump our waste products into the sea and rivers, it does kill our fish. And then another thing is that besides the killing of the fish by pollution, we do have overfishing too. So overfishing is when companies and even people who are small entrepreneurs that actually go out to the coast and fish and sell the fish on a daily basis so that they can make a living. When they overfish, then it means the stock that we have of fishes in the sea, they become depleted. Our fishes can become extinct. So I saw an example of a documentary on TV where there were women who are fishing along one of our African countries' coastlines. They fish for a living. So basically they fish so much fish in one day that they get leftover fish for the following day. And what they want to do is they want to sell fresh fish for tourists every single day. So the fishes that were left from the previous day, they just throw them away. And then that's it. Basically, those fishes die, and then that is how depletion takes place, because then we're just fishing the fishes and then they're not even being consumed. They're just being thrown away. So basically, when we curb that and when we stop that, then we can be able to save our fishes from being extinct. And then increase in diseases like malaria. This happens because of the change in weather. For instance, we know that we had a lot of malaria in areas like above South Africa, Mozambique, and Zambia, and those countries that are more above South Africa. But recently we've had more malaria outbreaks in Mpumalanga. So this is because the weather in Mpumalanga is slightly becoming the same as the weather in Mozambique. So this is because of climate change, where you find that when the climate changes, then we have pests like mosquitoes able to survive in the weather conditions that they can, which is mosquitoes will survive in moist places. So if we have more moist weather in South Africa, then we're most likely to get the kind of mosquitoes that survive in moist areas, and that there will be an outbreak. So there are other diseases that will come from climate change, and if we don't stop climate change, then they will spread, and there are lots of plagues that can spread. So less and poorer quality of water. With the waste products being thrown into the water does become poisonous. It kills the fish, and we are drinking. There are lots of communities who are using rivers and dams for drinking water and for cooking water and for bathing water. So the quality of the water in rivers and dams becomes low. Then people just can't drink the water and use the water for bathing because it is of poorer quality. So that means that they become more health issues. So extreme weathers too, they add to the strain of water, food, and health. So basically, extreme weather does pressurize all of those things written in that bullet point. I think we have covered them in the previous bullet point. So it does add extreme pressure on everything else: food supplies, health supplies, and water supplies. And then basically, the effects of climate change, we also see them in people getting injured and being homeless. So, for instance, we find that in tornadoes and in hurricanes, we see those kinds of climate change problems in America, where they have longer seasons of hurricanes, typhoons, and tornado seasons. We see people being displaced, people being homeless because they need to be evacuated from their homes. Then they have to move into churches and community halls. And then some people end up not being able to survive and going back to normal life. They aren't able to be integrated into the societies where they come from anymore. They end up sleeping in the streets and depending on welfare, whereas they had jobs and they had homes and they had stable lives. So physical injuries, there are people who get physical injuries in climate when climate changes. For instance, there are people who have even died in floods, where you find that children and women have drowned, and then there are people who will get hit maybe by objects during a typhoon, a hurricane, strong winds, and then they end up being disabled. And then the second bullet point, desertification is increasing. So in dryness is increasing, less water because of less rainfall. Then we get more drier areas. Areas are drying up, so deserts are becoming bigger. And then plants and animals are becoming extinct. So because the weather is changing, plant life is getting extinct. I know there was a specimen of a plant that was found in Table Mountain, and experts are starting to see that this plant is now no longer growing there. Like there's less and less, meaning because of climate change, this plant is now getting extinct. So they have to come up with ways to intervene. And then some animals are becoming extinct. There are animals that can't survive under extreme weather conditions. Some animals can't survive in the cold and some can't survive in the heat. So because of the weather changing, then these animals get extinct. Now, people living on the coast are being affected by a rise in sea level. And this we see with people living on islands. So islands along South America, these people are being hit by typhoons. Remember, there was a big hurricane, tsunami, and hurricanes like Katrina and Andrew and all of the names that they've been given. These hit the hardest on islands and people who are living on the shores. They're the people whose lives get turned upside down because every time they experience a hurricane or a typhoon, it ruins their houses, it ruins the things that they've developed, the infrastructure. Then they need to start from scratch and build their homes and build their businesses. And it becomes very devastating because they have to deal with rebuilding and getting their livelihood back. Climate change is harmful to the development of a country and has a negative effect on a country's economy and its ability to take care of its people. So sometimes we have countries that are dependent on one or two things in order for them to survive. For instance, there are agricultural economies where you find like Ethiopia will be planting more bananas and will be planting more coffee. So when the season changes, then they get a lower production of their coffee and bananas. And then what we see is then they don't get enough money circulating in the economy, which is detrimental to the people living in the country. So that means they won't have enough resources to take care of the people. There's not enough money in the economy, so people can't take care of themselves. So climate change does affect economies. The people in Madagascar, they depend on cocoa, vanilla. So obviously when the weather changes, then they aren't able to make the turnover in production that they usually make. And then another thing is about economies, that if even countries like South Africa that produce mealies and then they sell the corn to surrounding countries like Zimbabwe, if the climate changes, then there is less production of mealies and whatever. Remember, corn is our staple food. Then there's less production of staple food and not enough food gets to the poorest of the poor, people in the rurals, and this can cause a problem of starvation even in our country. And obviously because we are exporting to surrounding countries, then we aren't able to have enough to sell to them too, and this will also affect their ability to feed their people. So it does affect economies and it also affects the way people live. So many poor people depend on agriculture for their livelihood and food supplies, so climate change will have a negative effect on them. So these are people in the rurals and people who are poor, who just depend on agriculture and the natural environment. So these are people who won't go to the mall to go buy food or any fancy supermarket. These are people who will plant spinach and plant cabbage and plant potatoes in their backyard and will eat from the ground and will eat food from the ground. There are communities who still live like that. So when the weather changes and they can't grow their crops or their crops don't grow well, then that will impact their food. They won't have enough food to eat. So climate change does impact people who are poor and people who rely on agriculture a lot. So mitigation and adaptation. Experts in climate change have come up with two approaches for addressing climate change: mitigation and adaptation. So, mitigation and adaptation are two approaches that climate experts have come up with in order to address climate change. So, climate mitigation is trying to slow down or stop climate change. It is about addressing and minimizing the cause of climate change. And for example, this you can do this by minimizing the emissions. So it's things like climate change summits where countries come together and then they commit and say we are committing to lower our emissions by 30% or 20% so that we give off less pollution into the atmosphere. So this is saying that we want to stop climate change by stopping or changing the way we live, maybe moving towards a greener system of doing things. Maybe instead of burning coal, we will maybe use solar panels and depend on the sun to give us more energy. For instance, we live in Africa where we get a lot more heat from the sun. So it would make sense for us to use solar power, which we would cost us less maybe and would save our environment better because it is natural. We get natural sunlight and a lot more sunlight. So us using solar power would mean that we are committing ourselves to slowing down climate change and maybe to stop the climate change completely. So, climate adaptation means learning to cope with the effects of climate change or finding ways to adjust the climate. This is done by looking for ways to lessen potential damage. Take advantage of opportunities, or cope with the effects. So this basically means that you're going to find a way to live with the damage. So maybe what you would do is maybe you will introduce an electric car, and then you will have you'll use an electric car over a car that depends on fuel, and you'll do things like that. So the activity that you can do just to test yourself would be to answer the question, what causes climate change? So you will explain what causes climate change, and then you will name and explain the approaches to solving climate change, which is in our last slide. There are two approaches. So you will name them and you will explain how they aim to solve climate change. And then a summary of what we've done today is basically what we've done in a nutshell. That's what you're going to find on this slide. Causes of climate change include people adding greenhouse effect gases to the air by burning fossil fuels, using harmful farming methods, cutting of trees, and pollution. Changing temperatures and the rainfall patterns affect farming and cause sea levels to rise. This can result in extreme weather conditions. Climate change can also affect the growth, development, and economy of a country. Mitigation and adaptation are two approaches that we can resolve climate change with. So this is a link that I've put up for you guys. It's by NASA and the government. So this link basically tells you more about climate change and the effects of climate change. So please join me tomorrow for the next lesson at 3 o'clock, and then we will be completing Chapter 9, Unit 3. So we're done with Unit 1 and Unit 2. So we will be doing Unit 3 tomorrow. So for more information, you can contact Africa Teen Gigs. There is a website, and then you can also follow at Africa Teen Gigs on all social platforms or social media platforms. Or remember, you can also you can also email me. You can also email me on litigapuleng@yahoo.com. So that is where you email me. Thank you very much for joining the lesson, and see you tomorrow.